Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Brenda Baker, and we're excited you're here to enjoy this great presentation. Hope you're enjoying the conference. And just a few housekeeping reminders. Don't forget, all of our presentations are being recorded, so they'll be made available to you. Tomorrow you'll receive your sketches validation form, so check for that. And don't forget, we're a community of learning, so be on the camera. Otherwise, I'll call you out. No, I'm just kidding, really, seriously. So enjoy, Patrick, Terry, and Matt.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Really appreciate it. So good afternoon. Thanks everybody for hanging in. Last session of our day. The conference is half over. Can you believe it? It is just flying on by. I hope you had a wonderful afternoon and morning, and we'll keep this upbeat. We've got a lot of great information. I'm really looking forward to this as a shared project. Again, I'm Patrick Brown, Director of McKay, and I'll talk a little bit about my shared work in just a second with Michigan's Children, but I'd like to introduce some colleagues and friends at Michigan's Children. Matt Gillard, the President and CEO of Michigan's Children. Would you like to say hello?
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, everybody. I'm Matt Gillard, the President and CEO of Michigan's Children. Honored to be part of this presentation today and to be working so closely with McKay over the years.
Thank you, Matt. And we appreciate that partnership too. And Terry Banis, the Fearless Director of Communications at Michigan's Children.
Thank you, Patrick. It's really nice to be here as well. I sat in on your opening keynote this morning and I was very, very renewed and recharged. So thank you for that. And also, I just want to add this, if I could, on behalf of Michigan's Children and all of those who worked with Michelle Corey. Thank you very much for creating a new vision for your leadership award, your advocacy award, and for presenting that to Mr. James Smith this morning. I was really touched by that. I know that Michelle cared greatly for the success of McKay and all the support that can be offered your organization, and it was just very, very poignant and meaningful this morning. So thank you for making the decision to honor Michelle's memory that way, and so aptly so. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Terry and Matt. So welcome to our session this afternoon, What Michiganders Want, Investments in Children and Youth. Yes, you heard that correctly. Michiganders actually do care about children and youth, and we got some data to back it up, some new and exciting data in a project that we've been working on. As you may know, in addition to my roles and responsibilities at McKay, I also am in a shared capacity and shared time position with Michigan's Children. It's been a wonderful partnership for our two organizations. For me personally and professionally, I've learned a lot, and this is one of those core areas where we get to see that intersection of the work that we do and the crossover. And so I'll be kind of jumping in and out as well in our presentation today, wearing both of those hats, and just wanted to make you aware of that. In terms of our agenda this morning, this afternoon, gosh, it just seems like we started the day. We've got a statewide investment pool that we're going to be sharing with you, some of the findings that you'll find particularly interesting for the populations in McKay that we work with, and then a fantastic partner tool for you all to look at and to think about. We'll have some time for Q&A and next steps, and if we get you out of here a few minutes early before 4 o'clock, we'll try to do that as well. So I'm going to turn over to Matt, and he can take it away to talk a little bit about our project.
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. So as Patrick alluded to, we partnered with the Skillman Foundation. So the Skillman Foundation is, for those of you who aren't familiar, a big foundation in Southeast Michigan, a big funder of a lot of cool things, and a longtime partner and supporter of Michigan's Children. But we partnered with them on a unique project this summer to embark on and to produce a poll, a statewide poll of likely voters in Michigan, really just to try to ascertain what their knowledge and view of the impact of the pandemic was on children in Michigan, children and families in Michigan, and whether or not they saw or would support greater public investments in programs that support kids and families because of the pandemic. And so that was really the genesis behind this was we wanted to get some data and some information on where Michigan voters stood as we are hopefully emerging here from the COVID pandemic, as to what the impacts were and whether or not they saw value in and would support public investment in kids and programs because of the issues that the pandemic has caused on Michigan's families. So we partnered with a group called Lake Research Partners. This is a national polling firm, very well renowned. Been doing this a long time. I've actually worked with Lake Research Partners on polls specific to Michigan around early childhood issues as long as 15 years ago, probably at this point or more. So very well respected national polling firm that we contracted with to conduct this poll. Do we want to jump to the next? So the poll was actually conducted in late July, early August, and consisted of 800 likely voters, likely 2022 general election voters. So 800 is a pretty big number. So this is a robust poll with pretty significant data, data that was received from the poll. So end of July, early August, and like I said, with the general notion of let's figure out what Michigan voters think about the impact of the pandemic on kids and what the level of support for greater public investments in kids and families and programs that support kids and families would be. All right. Is this you, Patrick, now?
Yes, it is. Sorry, I thought I was unmuted, but I was still muted. So one of the things that we're going to do this afternoon is share with you some of the specific findings. And specifically, I think what's important for you that are listening is the intersection of some of the themes that we're talking about. So when we're talking about children and youth, we're also talking about the communities and families in which they live and which they're surrounded by, and that intersects with a lot of our adult population. But it also just speaks to some of the societal investments that we're starting to see. And as Matt will allude to, I'm sure, over his remarks in the next few minutes, is that this is a project that Michigan's Children has been invested in, for many decades in terms of looking at ways to increase investments for youth and families. So some of the concepts are not new, but some of the results are particularly striking this time around, especially in the climate that we have coming out of a global pandemic, some of the racial justice movements and initiatives that have been sparked over the last 18 months. And so I just think that's really important to kind of set that tone. So here's one of the key findings that came out of this poll is that Michiganders expect more investment in children than what they're seeing now, with a 62% support among likely voters. And as you start to dig into some of these numbers, you notice that for many of us that are invested in some of these circles and care about these populations, certainly that support might ring a little higher in our circles. And when we start to dig into some of this data from the poll, you'll find that it actually, as of late, the support is widespread among many Michiganders, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of geographic location, which is new. And that's exciting, I think, for all of us as we kind of go forward.
So what's even just to build on what Patrick said. So, the 62% number is pretty good, something that we were excited to see, and that people understand the impact, shows us that people understand the impact that the pandemic has had on kids and families, and are willing to support or even expect greater public investment as a result of it. This next number was really quite surprising to us, and I think really one of the more remarkable things that came out of this poll is that we asked those same people, would they expect or support more investment in children, even if it meant raising their own taxes, and 58%. So we saw a very low drop off of the level of support for greater investments into programs serving kids and families, even when we attached the dreaded taxes word to it. This is a number that you just don't often see in public opinion polling. But that, we're starting to see it in Michigan's kind of an outlier on this number, but we're starting to see this number creep up in even other states and nationally as well, when people are asked about what it's going to take for the country to emerge from the pandemic and to really support the kids and families that were maybe most impacted by the pandemic. But this is a very strong number and something we can build on. And what Patrick said as well, what we've seen across and we'll get into some more specifics here on details about some specific areas that the public supports investment in. But one of the big takeaways for us is that we saw near unanimity in almost all of these areas geographically around Michigan. And that's very important because we have real geographic diversity in the state, as you know, and from a political standpoint, that often creates a lot of challenges. We often run into situations where someone will say, well, that might be great for Southeast Michigan, but we don't want that up north, or we don't want that out on the western side of the state. Or, on the western side of the state, they want this, but in Southeast Michigan, they say that won't work here. What we saw in these poll results is really similar results in numbers in every geographical area of the state, which is very encouraging and something that we certainly can use from an advocacy standpoint moving forward, that we can demonstrate to individual lawmakers and or candidates coming up in upcoming elections that the people in their communities want this really across the board, everywhere you go.
Here were some of the top concerns, really the kind of the nitty gritty that came out in terms of the percentage that were polled that viewed or ranked these as the top concerns. And not that this gives us happiness, but as you look at some of these top concerns, you can start to see, particularly where our populations are concerned, where they might fall into some of these areas and some of the longstanding barriers and challenges that they face. So obviously 87%, the top concern was kids falling behind in school due to the pandemic. This going back and forth between virtual, hybrid, and back in person, and even being in person and not maybe getting the quality of delivery of instruction that we've been accustomed to. Kids living in households that struggle to afford basic needs, certainly something that we're familiar with in this community. Exposure to trauma in homes and communities. 79% for kids' mental health, and not every kid getting the learning supports that they need. What I think is most important to take away from this is that you're seeing numbers here that, people just don't agree on anything these days with this high of a percentage. So to see some of this trending here of this initial data, and to really look at that almost, for lack of better words, universally, there's support around these areas, at least addressing them and considering them as top concerns for families across our state. That's very poignant, and we feel like that's important to ultimately tack into, which is what Terry will talk about, ways that we can share this information and dig into it and really talk to other members of our community, other advocates, and even policymakers about expanded programming and opportunities to address some of these actual concerns too.
So this slide kind of correlates to what, Patrick just said. And so we saw, some real understanding from the public as a result of this poll, that the public gets it. The public understands where the impact of the pandemic had and the impact specifically it had on children and families, and that more public support and public investments are going to be needed in these areas. And so then, we take what are the top concerns, and then we ask, all right, well, where should the investments be made? And these, again, are some very high percentage numbers that, like Patrick said, you just don't see, this level of agreement in a lot of policy areas where you talk about, in this divided society and divided political world that we're living in. But we see high numbers in where the public thinks investments should be made to help offset the impacts of the pandemic. And right at the top of the list, career exposure, job training, and skill building. I mean, that's in a nutshell. I mean, that's McKay. It's got McKay written all over it, right? That's what we're all about here. And so, the public gets it, and the public understands that we're going to need to do more. The general public understands that our government systems, our public systems, are going to need to do more to support these types of programs to help children and families emerge from the pandemic. Also, something that really shines through in this poll is the understanding of the impact of the pandemic on kids' mental health and the lack of supports and services currently out there in a lot of ways for kids' mental health needs. And so programs to improve kids' mental health is a big driver of the concern amongst the general public. Programs that reduce the number of youth in the criminal justice system. Once again, this shows a level of understanding with people throughout the state that we need to do more to invest in programs that support kids who need it when they need it, when they're young, before they get thrust down a path that leads to unfavorable outcomes as an adult. More affordable childcare. This is an issue, obviously, that's getting a lot of attention, both here in Michigan and nationwide as we emerge from the pandemic, and even before the pandemic was getting a lot of attention, the challenges that a lot of working families are facing as it relates to childcare. And then expanded learning time. This is another thing that is really emerging as a hot issue as we come out of the pandemic, a real understanding that, there's a great need to provide educational opportunities to children outside of the classroom. And so whether that's summer learning programs, after school programs, or others, there's a real need for that, especially in light of the pandemic. So these are all good numbers, all I think point to a real level of understanding of the public and an opportunity for us to use this data and information to advocate for more support for these programs.
And if I could just add one thing to that, Matt, too, is that particularly for our adult and alternative, I mean, really all facets of the McKay Association, but really more concretely for those populations, a lot of times with adult education, we talk about the adult ed reporting system, and we catalog and we track all of these extreme barriers for all of our learners. And then honestly, seldomly do we really gather and look at some of that information. And so if we juxtapose that information with what we're starting to see here in terms of public sentiment, I really think that we have a cause for really being articulate about working to solve and address some of the underlying barriers and challenges that are preventing folks from moving on and accelerating in their life in a variety of different ways for families. So I was excited just personally by this information because I think it falls in line exactly with a lot of the barrier tracking that we report, and oftentimes we don't just do as a statewide initiative to really dig down into those numbers and address those. I think at the local level, people do a really excellent job of tracking that information and really trying to get resources through career navigation and things like that. But as a system, as a field, we haven't always been the lead on that. And so it was kind of reigniting for me personally that level of investment.
There was a question in the chat about the percentage. What percentage did you receive in return for the survey? They said that's excellent data.
Yeah, we don't. So this was a telephone poll that was done by this professional polling firm. So I don't have exact data on what their percentage of uptake was, but they have a process where they randomize phone numbers and contact people in order to get to 800 respondents that are diversified by race, gender, and geography, obviously, and age. And so they want a diverse cross-sector of the state voting population of likely voters in the 2022 general election. So that's the process that's used. It's similar to what public opinion polls that you see done in a lot of different areas.
So really, kind of bringing this all together, what does this look like? And kind of the big takeaways really for all of us, I think, where are outcomes most important for voters and for our investments? And we could think about, especially, voters, there could very well have been some of our colleagues, some of our participants, some of our families that have been touched or interviewed as a part of this poll, but ultimately the services and the outcomes that could possibly be produced by this information will certainly benefit them. So obviously fewer children with experiencing abuse and neglect. That's something that's very important to Michigan's children and the work that we do around the child welfare system and advocating for children and youth in the foster care system, in formal and informal settings. That intersects and touches a lot with our McKay community, as there are a number of adults we know that are kinship caregivers and providers that are caring for children who may not be their biological children, but maybe are nieces or nephews or grandchildren, cousins, those sorts of things. Also, children will be better prepared for the workforce and a successful future. That's something that we obviously are just talking about this morning with Josh Davies and just the theme of our conference, and trying to look at flexible learning options and accelerating additional pathways or more flexible pathways for people to get where they need to go and not be inhibited by a set structure or process. ultimately looking at the economy of our state continuing to improve. Certainly, we're seeing that in some of the initial state returns from revenue being up, and obviously our ARPA investment conversations, and we are happy to talk maybe about that a little bit, where Michigan Children sees some of those asks going. The number of youth in the juvenile justice system decreasing, certainly another population, especially when we think about our alternative population and many of the challenges that those youth have experienced in their educational pathway. Kids' mental health will improve, and certainly economic or racial inequity will be reduced. And again, I for us at McKay, this is, every single one of these little bullets here is something that we touch upon daily, if not weekly, monthly. And so very encouraging in terms of just a more public awareness of these issues, and the fact that there seems to be a widespread movement or understanding that there needs to be further investment.
Okay. So jumping in now, Patrick, right? We're jumping into kind of what we're looking for moving forward for supplemental opportunities after the state budget, right? So, the state budget passed here back the end of September before the October 1 deadline. And there was, general agreement, obviously, between a Democratic governor and Republican legislature on how to spend a lot of the ARPA dollars, as well as some of the surplus dollars that the state had realized that revenues had been up from. But now, that agreement was reached with an understanding from all parties involved that there still needed to be some supplemental spending bills enacted here, over the fall to spend some more of these dollars. The reality is our state is sitting on a significant amount, into the billions of dollars, that are a combination of both still unspent ARPA funds, that's the American Rescue Plan funds that were passed by the federal government, as well as increased state revenues that have been generated over the last year. And so there is still a significant amount of money out there, and a real opportunity for the legislature and the governor to agree on some investments to address these issues that clearly the general public understands and sees and wants, and that we fight for, both at Michigan Children and McKay on a daily basis. So some of the opportunities we think is there's real, an opportunity for us to make a strong pitch for increased funding for adult and community education. For adult learners, especially without a high school diploma. There's a lot of discussion, and the governor has plans, and the legislature is talking about different options and a lot of different opportunities to address adults in skill building and job training options, but not as much a focus on those adult learners that do not have a high school diploma. We think that's really, a glaring omission in a lot of these plans. And we think there's a real opportunity right now to make the case for investments specifically in programs aimed at adult learners who do not have a high school diploma. Another area that's lacking, and that we saw directly with the, accounted for in the poll results as well, is after school and summer learning programs. Historically, Michigan has done a lousy job of investing state dollars into after school and summer learning programs. We do get some federal money specifically appropriated for summer school and out of school time programs, but we have not done a very good job over the years of investing state dollars into these programs. And we think there's a real opportunity to make that pitch now as well. There's clearly evidence already showing of the academic impacts of the pandemic on children, particularly disadvantaged children that may not have had the supports and resources through the pandemic and may still be struggling in different learning environments. And so we think there's a real opportunity to make the case for significant investment into out of school time programs with these dollars. Ongoing child welfare supports for older youth who are experiencing learning loss. This, fits hand in parcel with these other things we're talking about as well. Similarly in Michigan, we have not done a great job of supporting kids in our foster care system, and even supporting caregivers in the foster system. And so, when we talk about surplus state dollars, that is an obvious area to be focused on, where we can do more to support young people who are either currently in the foster system or are aging out of the foster care system and attempting to, get their adult lives on track to be productive and successful. We as a state could do a lot better job in supporting them through that process. And then, more essential supports that keep families strong, including housing, mental health, economic security and opportunity. We're seeing some of this addressed, frankly, as we speak right now in the negotiations and conversations that are happening in Washington in relation to the reconciliation bill or the Build Back Better agenda in the Biden administration. But even that, as those funds come down, hopefully, as those funds come down and agreement is reached there, it's still going to be on the state legislature and the governor to agree to a lot of the details on how those funds go out the door. And there's opportunity to even start some of that with the money that's available right now.
I had a question for you, Matt.
Sure.
From what I remember back in the 90s, there was a lot of after-school care programs. What happened to those?
So, I'm not sure. I was in the high school in the 90s, but no, I'm joking.
Oh, great. I wasn't in high school.
I just wanted to put that in there.
I was in diapers, Matt, so I don't know either.
There you go. No, so I think that there still are a lot of after school programs, frankly, and very good after school and out of school time programs operating in Michigan. But primarily they're funded either by federal funds through the 21st Century Community Learning Center program, which is a great program that provides federal dollars to the state of Michigan to support after school and out of school time learning programs. And then we also have a lot of philanthropic investment in after school. A lot of the foundations, the Skillman Foundation, who helped us with this poll, is a big supporter of after school programs. The Mott Foundation and out of the Flint area and others. We're blessed in Michigan to have a real strong philanthropic community. And a lot of that effort goes into supporting out of school time programs for kids, which is great. But if you look at that from a public policy standpoint and from an advocacy standpoint, the one leg of the stool that's clearly missing is state support, right? So I think, for a lot of child programs, ideally we have kind of three levels of support, three-legged stool of support. We have philanthropic investment, we have federal investment, and we have state investment. Well, we're really missing state investment in the after-school programs, and we have for a number of years. There has been at times, and maybe this was relevant, maybe some part of the 90s, where there's been some blips of significant state investment into after-school, but then as the budget cuts were made or other things, those often got left behind. And we, for at least the last 15 years or more, have done a really poor job as a state of investing in after school and summer learning programs.
Matt, there was another kind of related question around, and maybe this is good to answer this before we transition to the toolkit part, because it kind of talks to our broader work. The question that was in the Q&A, and I was going to send it to you, Brent, I just didn't have a chance to type it in, but what kind of solutions do you see in the future regarding childcare? Example, lack of availability and affordability. So this is prime question for you, Matt.
Yeah, no, this is and great timing for it, right? So, we saw, I would say this, so even before the pandemic, it's hard for even, I think us to kind of think back through the haze that we've experienced for the last 18 months or more. But even before the pandemic, we really started to see a real growing level of interest and support, bipartisan support for childcare, and a real understanding and recognition that our childcare system was broke and it was really an impediment to our economy moving forward in a meaningful way. Well, then the pandemic occurred and that just got hyper sped forward, right? 10 times hit the gas. And so it clearly became a huge factor immediately. And we've seen significant investments at the federal end throughout the pandemic. Every relief bill that was passed through the pandemic centered around, at least in part, and some of them in majority part, around childcare and investments in childcare. And so we've got a ton of money flowing into the childcare system right now, which is good, much needed, right? And that money's done a great job so far, a pretty good job so far, of at least stabilizing the industry and helping to support providers through the pandemic so they were not forced to close their doors. But we have a business model that frankly just doesn't work or didn't work. And so, and Michigan's not alone. The childcare problems are nationwide. Michigan has struggled, I'd say, more than most states for a long time. But we're starting to make some significant improvements. This last budget that the governor just, that negotiated with the legislature, there was $1.4 billion in federal child care money that was mostly ARPA funds in that, but we got that approved with the budget. And so that money's going out the door already. There's already grant programs in place. We're significantly increasing the reimbursement rates that we pay providers, as well as increasing the eligibility rate for who's eligible for subsidized child care support. And so we're moving in the right direction. Well, the framework that was announced today by President Biden, that, you know, looks like, hopefully, I'm knocking on my table here, is going to be the framework for the reconciliation bill that ultimately passes, has even more wonderful things for childcare and universal pre-K included in it. And so really, you know, we are on the precipice of some significant changes to our childcare system. Essentially, we're moving towards the notion of childcare as a public benefit. Whereas, you know, in the past, we've had this kind of pieced together system that some states do better on than others, where we're trying to subsidize the lowest income of working families with their childcare costs, but all funneling into a system, an overall childcare system that just wasn't sustainable for providers and wasn't working for the vast majority of families, whether you were able to eligible for the subsidy or not. So we're moving with this significant federal support towards a system that is much more universal in nature and really aimed at providing affordable quality childcare opportunities for all children. And so the centerpiece of the childcare component of the Build Back Better bill is really a notion that no family up to, I think, under $400,000 annual income. So, I mean, that's significant income. Any family under $400,000 annual income will never pay more than 7% of their income for childcare. And so there'll be a sliding scale base to it and a really significant supports for providers and others. So I think there's really good things on the horizon for childcare. There's going to be a transition. There already is a transition undergoing in the childcare world right now, as people are figuring out what their new work life is going to look like. You know, a lot of people are not returning to a out of the home 9 to 5, working environment. And a lot of people by necessity have had to maintain that even through the pandemic. But that's obviously a transition or a shift in the childcare landscape as well. And so a lot of that is working through. I think we're on the track for good things. And the reality is that it's the workforce in early childhood and childcare that needs to be supported for us to really change the system. And I think people understand that. The one other thing I would add to in Michigan, and it's really helped us, and I think will continue to help us as we figure all this out, is that the business community is really engaged on this issue. Right now, they're not engaged on it because they want what's best for infants and toddlers and, a better learning environment and safer opportunities. They're invested in it, or they're engaged in it because they are unable currently to attract and retain employees under the current childcare model that's working. But whatever their interest is, they're engaged in it, understanding the challenges and lending some real political support towards increased investments and improvements in childcare, which obviously helps us across the political spectrum.
And I would just add one thing to this, particularly for us as practitioners, is that the realization of the intersectionality of so much of this, right, and so many of the state initiatives. And I think oftentimes as providers, we kind of fall into the assumption that we have to be the provider for all of these services because there are no other services maybe in our communities that are available, and that our learners and our families will not be able to be connected. Well, now there's actually going to be increased opportunities at a very large scale, widespread scale across the state for things like internet access and broadband connectivity, for childcare, new centers to be created, not just existing centers, but, existing centers to expand their slots and to expand their current staff, but new centers to be created as well, for transportation and some of the flexibility there and investments in our infrastructure and things like that. So all of that to say, I think, part of what is exciting about this is that there will actually now be some more program opportunities available for the folks that we work with and that we serve, that really our responsibility then will not be to provide those services, but to connect them to them. and help raise that level of awareness as a part of the general populace and as part of maybe career navigation or barrier mitigation, and to connect them with these existing structures and programs that are in place that primarily those of us as practitioners have been saying we need supports, we need resources like this in place. And so now we're going to be starting to see that over the next year, 2, 3, 4 years, as we start to have this major investment. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars already that are in the Bank of Michigan, the Treasury, that need to be allocated, in addition to any other possible future allocations from our own state budget and from federal investments as well. So what I'd like to do is turn this over. It's a lot of information, I know, to process, really kind of exciting actually for those of us that have worked in this and very passionate about this. And so what I'd like to do is turn it over to Terry Banas, our Director of Communications at Michigan's Children. And her work has been in developing a toolkit of information and resources that you can have and have access to. And we've been sharing with other constituent groups. And so I'd love for her to talk about that.
Okay, well, thank you, and hello again, everybody. You've heard a lot of information. Matt and Patrick have done a fabulous job talking about the issues that were spotlighted in the opinion poll and why they matter. And so what I want to spend just a few minutes with you about today, maybe 10 minutes, is going over a toolkit that we've created to help you better understand what it was that the public had to tell the pollsters, and how perhaps you can use that information to bolster your own arguments when you talk to policymakers and other decision makers in your communities and statewide. We think this is really, really important information. As Josh talked about this morning, your keynote speaker, you can't look forward, you can plan forward unless you look back at what happened. And that's what we in the Skillman Foundation wanted to do. We wanted to talk to people about this shared experience of the pandemic across the state, and ask people how that influenced the way they look at the state, the state that their children and youth are in. And we have about 2 million children and young people across the state, but they're also parts of families, members of families. And so we wanted to hear what that shared experience, how it may have influenced the way they look at these important issues today. And as you heard from the presentation just a little while ago, voters overwhelmingly told us, and these were Democrats, Republicans, Independents, overwhelmingly told us that what they've learned from this pandemic is that we are not investing enough in children. And as we know, crisis begets change, and they've realized that things have to change. And so if you could move on to the second page. In this toolkit, which is going to be available to all of you. I don't know if Patrick wants to send that how you want to receive it individually, but you can all email me and I can send you the PDF copy. We should probably also put it on our website to make it easier for you, but we just completed it this week. Though in this 15-page document, we list a series of FAQs, frequently asked questions, and some of the information, a lot of the information that Matt and Patrick shared with you a little while ago was anticipated and shared in those questions. We also created some key messages to help remind you of what it is that we really want to take away from this poll and why it matters. We created a sample letter to a policymaker, which can be, which is really just a template. You can, pick it apart, use parts and pieces of it. You can use it as a whole, but it's a way to send a message to policymakers telling them that we really want to see investments in the things that these residents, our voters, Michigan voters talked about: the need for childcare, the need for workforce development and skills training, the need for childcare, all of the big issue areas that were brought out in the poll. And so we wanted a letter to be, drafted for you to use as you will, because what we know from influencing people and educating people is that a strong message is only as important as the frequency it's repeated. So the more a message is amplified, the more a message is shared out, the more likely people are to hear it, to understand it, to incorporate it. Hopefully, if you're a lawmaker, in your decision making. So yes, we're really strongly behind what these voters told us in the poll, but we want to see people share that information and use it to educate their own way of conversing with decision makers. Also in the packet are some graphics that you are welcome to use in your social media, in other presentations that you need to make. And these are all the graphics that are available, but they're hyperlinked so that you can get a printable copy or downloadable copy available from inside the packet. And then also we've got a link to a podcast that we have a podcast of Michigan's children called Speaking for Kids, and we talk about a lot of crucial issues that impact families and young people. And we had a podcast recently. Matt Gillard is the host, and Patrick Brown was the guest, one of the guests. And we broke down the poll, had a discussion about what the poll really meant. And it's a 30-minute conversation. It's very fascinating. One of the principals involved in doing the research for the poll was also featured in that conversation. And if you have a chance to listen to it, it's pretty engaging. We also have a copy of the report details that you just saw in Matt and Patrick's presentation, and that's linked in this toolkit. There's also a 1 hour, this poll was completed in time to present at the Mackinac conference, which is that big annual event that the Detroit Regional Chamber sponsors every year. It gets a lot of attention from business people and from politicians. And Matt and Selena Lake from Lake Research and the Skillman CEO and Angelique Power created, led a presentation through the poll and talked about its significance. And so you can also view that, a link to that video that's available on YouTube from our poll. So this is just kind of a quick run through, but Patrick, would you mind? And also at the very end is the news release that we distributed to, announce the poll results back in September, right in advance of the Mackinac conference. So, it's really a compilation of a lot of features and information that detail the poll and why it's significant. But in the Q&A section or the FAQ section, Patrick, if you wouldn't mind going over to that right at the start of the piece. I'm going to go to a readable version of that myself. I wanted to talk about a couple of the questions that came up just to support what Matt and Patrick had to say. So the people that were interviewed in this poll, they were all identified as likely voters in the 2022 general election. So these are people that are pretty well engaged, and they represented different political leanings. Okay, the pollsters who created the poll made sure that the poll represented a wide swath of individuals. What was, I think, and it's answered in one of these questions, what I think was kind of significant is that as arguments were presented to the voters about the need to invest in children, as more information was shared, their support grew. So what that told us is that the more people learn about an issue and learn about why these investments are important and how they could change the trajectory of children's lives and families' lives and also our state's own prosperity, their support grew. And that was true across the board. What that tells us as communicators is that the more that we can talk about this information and relate it to what we as providers of adult learning and community education have to share, the more we can make those connections, there is there's solid hope that we can turn minds around, influence people. So we really see this toolkit as an opportunity to help educate you on what our findings were, and then also encourage you to become engaged and, send letters, send emails, send texts to your lawmakers about why you support childcare or adult learning, or how it's going to improve the lives of their constituents. And give them the data that we've realized that 62% of likely voters, their constituents, support what you want. And, it is the job of elected officials to support the will of the people in an ideal world, and very practically too. So we hope this information will encourage you to sort of get involved and to speak out as individual constituents, as people who provide services in their communities. And we would, Michigan's Children stands ready to make presentations around the state if you'd like. So contact us, and I'll drop my email address in the chat right now, but it's also on the last page of the document that you have before you. If you'd like to get a PDF version of this today or tomorrow, feel free to email me, or I could also talk to Patrick about how that could be made available to McCain members in general. But so that's pretty much it. I welcome you to check it out and spend some time taking a look at it. If you have questions, certainly email us, and we'd be happy to engage you in this important endeavor. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. I wanted to, before I turn it back over to Matt for any final thoughts, I wanted to just share Michiganschildren.org is our website here. And if you scroll down right here on the homepage is this Michiganders Expect More Investment in Children. And basically all the information that we shared today, and a little bit more detail and graphics, as well as all there, as well as some media coverage around this particular event. So I will also put this in the chat for everybody. You can explore at your leisure. But I'll turn it back over to you, Matt, with just any final questions or any final thoughts before we take some questions.
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. No, thank you all. This is great. You can tell we love talking about this stuff. We really think that this poll is a huge tool, and I like to say, another big arrow in our quiver as we fight for these things that we want to see happen here in the state. And the one thing I would add is, I know no one wants to talk about it, but we're heading right into a big election here in Michigan. 2022 is going to be a huge year. We got the governor up. We got every state legislative seat is going to be up with new maps being drawn, and it's just going to be a tremendous election. And we really, from our standpoint, from an advocacy standpoint, elections are huge opportunities for us to get people talking about the issues that we care about. This poll could not be coming at a better time. I think this will be a huge weapon for us heading into that election, and to get candidates for all offices to understand what the people in their communities expect and what the people in their communities want. And once we get them talking about it on the campaign trail, then whoever it is that wins those races and gets elected, we got our foot in the door already, and we're able to come after them.
Any questions from anyone? Any questions you see, Brenda?
Yes, there's one in the on the Hoover, and it says COVID vaccine requirements are causing more shutdowns. What do you see changing this?
You want to take that one, Matt, or would you like me to?
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't see it in the Hoover. So the vaccine requirements are causing more shutdowns? I don't know. I think the vaccine debate is certainly playing out in a political way, which I think is unfortunate. I think for at least relative recent history, meaning the last 100 years or more, vaccines have been seen as a real positive for mankind, and made our world a safer and better place. And it's up until just recently that vaccines have become political in some way. And I think that's unfortunate for everyone involved in our society in general.
Other questions?
There's another question. Is there any discussions on public forums for candidates, and is the template at Michigan's Children on how to host one during the election?
Yeah, we're not there yet, but yes, we will certainly be engaged and be willing to partner with anybody and everybody who wants to get engaged on the election. And so, you know, what's important to think about even this early on that is whether you're in an area that may be dominated by a primary campaign versus a general election campaign. And yeah, we'll be heading, as we head into 2022, a big part of our planning will be what to do with the campaign and the election and how we can help partners like McKay and anyone else that wants to engage with candidates in their area. So really stay tuned to our website for that. And we are always anxious to support and help folks in any way that we can get engaged through the elections.
I just had to be wonderful to see everybody do a candidate forum. You know, they really
we've
are.
had fun with those in the past.
Yes.
Oogie, I'll be bugging Oogie again, I'm sure.
Done Kalamazoo and Detroit and Grand Rapids, and we've done down in Southeast Lenawee County. So we've done them all over Jackson, and so it's a great opportunity for policymakers to learn more about your programs, to get questions directly from their constituents, your participants, future voters. They love to talk to future voters, and you know, it's a public stop for them, but they also have a responsibility to be held accountable by us as the electorate. So don't shy away from these opportunities, right? And we'll be happy to help you set those up through Michigan's Children and McKay.
Yeah, we'll do all we can to make it easy.
There's someone else with a question.
Yeah, I had a question. Do you think virtual schooling is going to continue to be an option due to this pandemic? Those who have never done it before, like first grade, second grade. My sister was a retired nurse, and she found herself being grandma and going to school with her granddaughter at home, you know?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's certainly one that's not unique to Michigan. I don't know. I mean, I think the reality is, as technology advances, there's going to be growing opportunities for children to engage in alternative ways through their educational process. But I don't see, I don't see us. I certainly see there continuing to be probably the vast majority of students in an in-school daily setting, what we would consider a traditional educational setting. But that doesn't mean there won't be additional options for a lot of families if they like that, and if that works better for them, to have some virtual components to education. But I think a lot of people may do with what they could manage in the past year and a half from an educational standpoint, but I don't see it as it certainly wasn't a huge success in many regards, moving on online.
I agree, and I think they need that socialization.
Exactly.
But with adult education, I found just quite the opposite from adult students. Because of the nature beast, so to speak, they have jobs and families.
Yeah, I mean, you can eliminate a lot of those barriers, right? I mean, you can eliminate.
Yeah, they could do it in the middle of the night.
Yeah, transportation and other things, right?
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think as we look back at this 10 years from now, 20 years from now, there'll be some positives that came out of the pandemic. And I think virtual opportunities and people becoming a lot more custom. I mean, look at us. This would have been 2 years ago.
I would have never known how.
Zoom conference thing. What are you talking about? And now it's second nature, right? We do it all the time.
I think ultimately a hybrid would work great.
I think similarly with people's work environments, I think a lot of people are going to be realizing that, being in the office 9 to 5 days a week is not necessary. And you're already seeing that debate playing out. So I think it'll be interesting to see how we as a society emerge from this pandemic, not just the educational side.
Correct. I agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Before I turn it back over to Brenda, I want to reiterate just a couple of things. Thanks for being with us. Like Terry said, we do have a podcast at Michigan's Children. It's called Speaking for Kids. So if you have Spotify, Google Play, or Apple Podcasts, you can go on there and look for Speaking for Kids, and you might hear some familiar voices if you want to download and listen to it. We also do a monthly Lunch and Learn series, and these are just informational series around a variety of topics, usually around building up your advocacy and just knowledge around some of these issues. Our most recent one was around this similar topic, but they're always the third Wednesday of the month at noon. So we've got one upcoming before Thanksgiving, and you can look for that information coming next week soon. We've been a little delayed because I do a lot of that work, and obviously this week I was focused on the McKay conference. So next week we'll announce what that is, and then obviously visit our website for more information on all of these topics and issues, but in particular this presentation and more about the poll. But I'll hand it over to you, Brenda.
Okay, thank you everyone for attending. Don't forget, 7 o'clock tonight is our animal trivia night. Join us. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.